So hi, my name is Natalie Kozlowski, and as you might have guessed, my talk is called How to Interact with Your Front-End Developer. So, what does this mean exactly? Well, I consider myself a front-end developer and designer. I've had the pleasure of working on a lot of different types of teams, development teams where everyone is working remotely on a project, teams where developers are on one side of the building in their own small little world, and you have designers and sales teams and marketing teams, and they're on the other side of the building in their own marketing world. I've worked on very small teams when everyone's collaborating in the same space very closely and interacting with one another. So back to the title, How to Interact with Your Front-End Developer. I'm going to talk about my experiences and what I've come to believe is the best way that front-end developers and back-end developers can work together and keep your front-end developer happy, hopefully. A tiny bit about myself. Graduated from Michigan State University, BA in professional writing. I specialized in digital and technical writing. So enough with introductions, though. And what I'm doing right now. So I currently work for CodeGuard. I graduated, moved to Atlanta, and I'm now the front-end developer for a company called CodeGuard. We do website and database backup monitoring and restore. So that's what I'm doing now. Now I'm done with introductions. So my first question, to kind of get us started, is what is front-end development? As professionals in the industry, how would we describe it today? And does it mean something different today than it did 5 years ago? And does it mean the same thing to every developer? It's a question that I get asked pretty often. I get asked it by people that aren't in the industry, that kind of don't know what the term is at all, but also by other developers and other people in tech, which is really interesting to me. Here's a funny tweet I found about how someone else tried to describe it. I think we all know how to use our words a little better than that. Here's another quote. To enjoy front-end engineering, you must have some interest in visual design and be kind of a masochist. And I think this kind of sums up why some people, or that person, maybe thought that way. For me, front-end development means kind of being many things at once. At CodeGuard, I've been lucky enough to work on a lot of different types of projects, including redesigning our homepage, our mobile homepage. I get to work on exciting features inside the app, and I'll talk a little bit about this particular feature, later in the talk. I also get to do a lot of graphic design for CodeGuard, banners, illustrations. This character's name is CG. He's our friendly CodeGuard robot who tirelessly monitors your website, making sure it's safe. And I have him holding beer mugs here to get everyone excited about the happy hour. That's very close. And I like dressing him up in many different costumes. Because what app is complete without a friendly mascot? Your designer gets to dress up. I get to do t-shirt design for my company and infographic design. So as you can see, I kind of like to do a wide variety of things, and yet I still call myself a front-end developer for my company. So kind of back to the question, what do we front-end developers do in any given day? Do we write div and p tags all day long? Is that what it means to be a front-end developer? Do we write controller methods? Do we debug Internet Explorer all day long? That certainly can fill an entire day. Test pages on mobile devices, create Photoshop mockups, wireframes. And what does it all mean for your Ruby project, or that WordPress website your team just started to build for that one client, or that Cake project, that Node.js app, or that insert technology here project that your team just started building? Front-end or client-side development may be a relatively obscure internet discipline compared to others, but I think in the end it's this really cool hinge role that requires both aesthetic sensitivity and programming rigor, and for me it is a balance between design and development. And of course, communication needs to be clear between the different types of developers on a project. So whether you write Ruby or Perl or Go, I think hopefully you'll be able to leave today with some helpful tips on how to interact with your front-end developer no matter what they may do. So this talk again will be a tale of my own experiences of what has worked and what hasn't worked for me when I interact with the back-end team. Some of these lessons learned came from working at CodeGuard, some from other places. And for reference, when I say like we, I, us throughout the presentation, I'm kind of referring to front-end developers. When I say things like you guys, I'm kind of talking like to back-end developers. And real quick, how many people here would call themselves a front-end developer? Okay, a pretty good number. So you guys will know exactly what I mean throughout this presentation. How many people here would call themselves a backend developer? Okay, pretty even split. So chances are you guys aren't making everything look pretty all on your own. Chances are you're working with a front-end developer or designer to help you out. So I hope that you guys can take away some useful tips today. So I'll finally get started with my first tip, which is get involved with the design process. At least don't be afraid to get involved with the design process if you're a backend developer. The best backend developers that I've ever worked with all cared as much about design and usability as I did on a project. I can't really stress how true that is for me. Now, when I say get involved with the design process, I don't mean you should take my mock-ups and fire up Photoshop and start adding rainbow gradients to everything you see and rounded corners. And it's not exactly what I mean. I mean, do care about usability and care about the user experience and care about design. So how do you start to do that? You can ask to see your designer or your front-end developer's wireframes early on in the design process. For example, if a project is given a week to complete, it starts on Monday, at Wednesday at lunch, you can say something like, hey, how are those wireframes coming along? I'd love to see them. If you're willing to show me, or if your front-end developer designer approaches you asking for quick feedback, don't be afraid to say yes, because sometimes it really does just take 2 minutes, 1 minute of your time for me to get useful feedback from you. So I'll give an example now of when I got feedback from one of the back-end guys on my team that really helped me out. I'm sorry if this is washed out or if it's hard to see on the screen, but this feature here, we call it our website and database backup success graphs. So the idea is you log into your dashboard and you see out of your websites and databases how many of them are experiencing problems with their backups, because sometimes things do happen. You change your website connection information, we can't take a backup that day, or your server crashes, or your host is doing maintenance on your server and we can't connect, therefore we can't take a backup. So we wanted to be very transparent with our customers about when their backups were experiencing issues below 100% backup success and database backup success. So here's a screenshot of the final product, and so is this one here. So again, the goal being we wanted to increase transparency with our customers and let them know when problems were occurring and bring it to the foreground of their mind when they log in. But I went through a lot of design variations when it came to this feature before I finally settled on the winning one. So here's one of those variations. Again, I'm really sorry if it's hard to see colors on this. I'm not sure. But in this variation, I have this red bar here in the middle of the page that lets you know. And I was thinking to myself, like, okay, I have this red warning bar, and it's close in proximity to the graphs, so hopefully people will see the relationship between those two things. I didn't want to overload the page too much with detailed information right then and there, so I include a link for you to go view more information about the errors, on a different page. And with this variation, I played with the idea of having a separate table completely just for your websites and databases that were experiencing problems. And then below that, on the main dashboard page, you would have all of the rest of your websites and databases that were experiencing 100% success. But I quickly ran into a problem. The way we show databases in our dashboard is by having them inline underneath our websites in the same table. So I thought to myself, well, what if a website is experiencing a database, or what if a website is experiencing a backup issue, but a database isn't, and vice versa? How do we show that information in the same table without that being confusing? So I kind of scrapped this idea. Same thing here, I just moved the bar to the top, but I was wondering if that was too scary, like having red colors in their face right when they log in. And same thing here, splitting up to multiple tables with different error messaging, and it was all just, a little too much. And sometimes when you stare at a design for so long, you get stuck, on the same kind of design patterns in your head you keep thinking about for how to solve a problem. So back to the winning design. I sat down with Jonathan and Randall, two of my coworkers, two of our back-end gurus at CodeGuard, and asked them what they thought about all of these variations. And in the end, the ideas they came up with how I could improve each one is what helped me come to this final point. It would have been, I guess, better maybe to show my designs to another designer to see what they thought. But it turns out that I am the only front-end developer and the only designer at my company, so I don't really have that other partner to bounce ideas off of. So being a backend developer, I think being open to hearing my ideas and getting that feedback, giving me that feedback is very important for me. And you guys also think about design in a way that's very different in a way that I think about design and design problems. So again, that outside opinion is very important for me when it comes to thinking about different things. And they were able to tell me what worked with one of the designs, what didn't, and so I ended up combining all the ideas together, and instead, again, I really apologize if it's hard to see, but I have red striping in the table itself that highlights the background color of the website that is experiencing issues, so kind of combined some of their ideas, and this also meant that there was less text on the page, which is always better. So how else can you start to care about usability and the end user? Voice your opinions to your designer honestly. Don't just accept what I create as the be-all, end-all way for how something should be solved. If I came to you and said, hey guys, this is the new sign-up button for our homepage, and you think that's an ugly button, tell me that's an ugly button. If 5 people in the room all think that's an awesome button and you hate it, please speak up and tell me that you hate it. This is our new logo. It's Comic Sans, and it's here to stay. So if you want to stop me, go ahead and say anything, speak up. Or if I put a piece of content, at the top of the page versus another piece of content, and you think the order should be flipped, question my design decisions, is kind of the point I'm trying to make here. If you think the order should be flipped, let me know. Or if you think I had the order right, ask me why I made that choice. It's comforting to know that when I work with a backend developer, they want to stay informed about my design decisions, and that they care about the user experience. It makes working with a backend developer who cares about these things that much more enjoyable for me. And I've worked in environments before where backend devs and front-end devs really clashed over the user's experience. They wanted my code to be written as quickly as possible so I could hand it off to them so they could code their work as quickly as possible and move on to the next big thing. And they didn't really care about the hard decisions in the UI that I still had to make and figure out. And subconsciously, this makes it seem like my work isn't as valued to them. I'll draw from CodeGuard for one last example. So here's our current homepage again. We didn't always have these trust seals at the bottom. This is above the fold. We have the McAfee, Norton Security, BBB. We didn't always have those there. So my coworker and I decided one day to try and A/B test our homepage, to see if we could increase people clicking on our sign-up buttons, to increase conversions by signing up for a plan on our plans page. So we wanted to come up with a homepage variation that increased conversions, and so we thought we wanted to build more trust with our website visitors, have these trust seals, and we're a credible business. So honestly, I was a little skeptical at first, before the test launched. Because I did redesign the homepage, I thought the homepage looked cleaner without these seals. I thought it looked more elegant without these trust seals. The designer and me fought this a little bit. But we launched the experiment, and the end result was a staggering 56% probability rate and end result that the trust seal homepage would outperform the original homepage. I mean, look at all those conversions we were essentially leaving on the table by not having these 4 or 5 small images on our homepage. And so despite the designer and me having qualms about changing our homepage in such a bold way, I was thrilled with the results, and today this is still what our homepage looks like. Now I tell this story because a week later, one of the backend guys approached me and was like, Natalie, what's up with our homepage? I see these new images, and when did they appear? Why are they there? And he seemed genuinely confused by it, kind of probably how I felt about the change at first. Didn't really understand it. So I told him about the experiments and the success it had, and he was just as excited about it as I was. And what's cool about this story is that he came to me and questioned a design that he saw, that had nothing to do with his work, but he saw something and he pushed back against, this idea. He pushed back against it. He didn't understand it, so he questioned this design decision. And it was, a really nice conversation. He could have just as easily seen the change, not said anything, thought, that's kind of weird, and went about his work, but we had a nice conversation about it. So it's little things like that show me that you as a backend developer or software engineer, whatnot, care about design, care about our users, and care about our website visitors' experience. So if you do want to get involved with the design process, also don't be afraid to do it early on. At CodeGuard, when it's time to start wireframing a new feature, me and the backend guys, we all jump in on the same whiteboard and we start wireframing and sketching and drawing boxes together. When it's time to start brainstorming, I don't just, take my notebook and go away in a dark corner and brood over it until like something genius comes out. Maybe I wish it went that way sometimes, but it's honestly awesome when the backend guys want to jump in on this process with me. Again, because you guys think about design in a way that's very different than how I think about design. And I love getting that different perspective. And it's also when it comes time to start coding, it's nice to know that you guys have a visual in your mind of what the final product will be, which I can only hope will, help your work later on if you just have a better idea of, what it is that you're building. Here's another quote that I thought was interesting. Front-end developers establish a visual language between designers and engineers. So back to my first question a little bit, what is front-end development? I agree and disagree with this quote, but my problem with it is I don't know why we always have to draw these harsh lines in the sand about what someone does on a team, that the designers do this, and that the front-end developers do this, and that the back-end developers do this. I've tried to explain so far that in my experience, teams that work closely together and really get involved with each other's work function way smoother, and that my time spent on these teams is way more enjoyable than on teams where everyone is siloed to their individual responsibilities. The designers do this, and the front-end developers do this, and the back-end developers do this. I think teams that allow these roles to intertwine and overlap end up producing a stronger product in the end because everyone has a much deeper understanding of the project as a whole and the feature of what they're building. I think they get more connected to each part of the process, which I think can only help in the success of the project. So to recap quickly, ask to see our wireframes. Do get involved in the design process and show in small ways that you care about the usability and the experience as well. Have your own opinions about our design. Push back against what we create. What I'd like to drive home is that I've just seen firsthand how opening up the communication and interaction between front-end developers and designers and back-end developers can make a really positive impact on a team. Tip number 2 is to walk your front-end developer through your code. So this one is a must for me when it comes time to that integration period, when the back-end code is done being written and the front-end code is done being written, and it's time to fit all the puzzle pieces together and make everything work. Before I begin this process, because it usually falls on me to kind of glue everything together, usually one of the back-end guys will always sit down with me face-to-face and explain what their code does, what files they edited, what everything does. These are usually short 3 to 5 minute meetings in person where I just get a very high-level understanding of what they wrote. And these meetings are incredibly helpful for me. Yes, I could gather, in theory, what their code is doing from their commit history in GitHub, their diffs, looking at things in GitHub, but I get a much deeper level of understanding if I get that short meeting with you when you can explain out loud and I can ask questions out loud. And yes, as a front-end developer, it's also our job to interact with the back-end code, like I said, and make modifications and create new methods as well. But for the more complicated pieces of a project, this one-on-one time is really valuable because the speed at which I can absorb that information is much faster, which means I can get to my code faster, and obviously the project as a whole hopefully progresses much faster and on time. So what's the first step you can take in helping me understand your code? I would say please leave useful comments in your code for me, not comments like this. And I know it may seem like a really simple, to do, comment your code, we should all do it. But when you forget and you're out of the office that day, it really does suck for me when I'm looking through this code and I really can't figure out what's going on. So how can we start writing comments that make sense for a front-end developer going through the code? This really doesn't do it for me. Something a little more helpful than this would really be appreciated. The second one is a little better. I'm starting to get an idea of an action that's taking place. And finally, we have a great short, 10 words or less, very descriptive comment that's telling me what's going on here. So going through at a later point in time, I have that reference point. So if you're used to working solely with backend developers on a project, adding a comment at the top of your methods to explain what things do may seem like an unnecessary step to you because the functionality is very obvious to you. But again, a front-end developer going through that code at a slower pace, we really do appreciate the comments. Another thing that's really useful is to tell me what I may need to do in order to run your code and view your work later. So I'll zoom in on this image a little bit later, or on the next slide. So for example, if you're done writing your work, do I need to run a database migration after pulling your code? Do I need to run a certain command in the console in order to view your work? This is an example from GitHub that Taylor, one of our backend developers, left for me. I requested a piece of functionality, so he built it and then left this awesome comment in his GitHub commit message for me. So zooming in a little bit, he told me what URLs to hit to view what would happen. He told me I would get a JSON object returned to me. He let me know that it applied to websites and databases. So useful comments in GitHub also are very useful for me, on top of the 3 to 5 minute explanations and on top of the comments. Again, it's all about going through the code and being able to understand it faster so we can get to other parts of our work faster. And similar to the first part of this tip, which is walk us through your code, also make yourself available for mid-project check-ins. The 3 to 5 minute meetings, like I mentioned again, are for that high-level understanding. But again, I want to be respectful of your time, so I don't want to sit down with you for an hour and have you explain your code to me line by line in excruciating detail. So that's when the mid-project check-in comes in, so I can ask questions again at a later time, because questions about your code are bound to come up. They always do. And the important part about this, I would say, is that if I do have to come to you for another question, just please be patient with me. It would be nice to know that you didn't want to throw a computer at me from across the room because I asked, hey, can you please explain that method one more time? I don't quite get it just yet. Again, your code may be obvious to you, just like you may think my design decisions are obvious to me. But I think when we stop assuming these things and become open-minded to more communication, things just go more smoothly for everyone. So to recap this tip, walk us through your code, 3 to 5 minute in-person meetings when the integration period starts. It's one of those scenarios where 5 minutes of your time may save me an hour of my time. Provide me with any useful instructions I may need to run your code later, and make yourself available later for questions. The mid-project check-ins later, they don't have to be in person. They could be on GChat, Skype, or HipChat, whatever your company uses for chat communication. And again, most importantly, please be patient. The bottom line is that I don't ever want to have to feel hesitant to ask for a second time for context if it's what I need in order to complete my work. And so the final tip is provide detailed testing feedback. And this tip also comes in 2 parts. This one may be the most important tip when it comes to keeping your front-end developer happy and keeping projects on schedule. So, front-end developers are usually in charge of browser testing. And when it comes to browser testing, there are quite literally a million things that could go wrong. Maybe even a billion or a trillion things that could go wrong. So we have a lot of browsers, we all know that. And sometimes they behave differently on different operating systems. And you got to test all that too. And there are mobile browsers, and they all have their own browsers. And then you start thinking about screen resolutions and different sizes, and high-density displays versus high-density displays. And basically, it can get pretty overwhelming pretty fast. Just looking at one corner of the mobile market, there are approximately 18,796 distinct Android devices. And I wouldn't be surprised if that number is also shy. I wouldn't be surprised if there were more. And this is just an image that shows some of the various dimensions that they come in, looking at the view and the window of the device. And I promise you, there is a direct relationship between how long it takes to test a page with how old the browser is that you're testing it on and how old the OS is that you're testing on. So at CodeGuard, like I said, I am the only front-end developer, the only designer, so all of this falls on me. And so my desire for this tip may come from being the only front-end developer on a team, but if you do have an extra 5 minutes to spare, jumping in on some browser testing is very appreciated. If you go out to test that one piece of backend functionality that you wrote and you have a few minutes to spare, pop open Firefox and see what it looks like there. You may catch something that I missed. And if you do find something weird, it would be really helpful if you could tell me what browser you were using at the time, what version of that browser, what operating system you were using, operating system version, etc. Better yet, send me a screenshot whenever possible. This dramatically decreases the time that I have to go hunting for that one bug if I already know what I'm looking for ahead of time. If you send me something like this screenshot, you're awesome in my eyes. I'll be instantly depressed that I have to go work in Internet Explorer that day. But still, this is something useful that I can work with. We got the browser version in there. We have the operating system, the page it was on, a giant pink arrow pointing to the problem area on the page. This is actually pretty much exactly what one of the backend guys will chat me and send me if they find something wrong. So something like this is very, very useful for me. Doing something like this. Hey Natalie, I noticed something weird in Firefox earlier on the checkout page. You should take a look at it later. Someone says to me as I'm eating my lunch away from my computer. Bad. Don't do that. Cool, so Firefox 26, 25, 24, 13, Mac, Windows. If it's Firefox version 26, that's our second most used browser according to Google Analytics by our users. So if that's the case, I'm going to go scarf down the rest of my lunch and fix that bug right away, especially if it's on a high priority page like our checkout page. Was it Firefox version 10? Okay, well, open an issue for it and I'll look at it later today or tomorrow. We use issues in GitHub to mark bugs for our application. So if you wanted to go ahead and open a new issue in GitHub and pre-assign it to me, then that would be even more awesome. And if you want to go ahead and attach a screenshot to that GitHub issue that you just pre-assigned to me, as my CEO would say, now we're cooking with gas. Also, write down the steps that you took to reproduce the bug. So if you were to write down something for me that went something like this. So first I clicked the input box, and then I clicked this link, and then I typed something over here, and then after that I tried to submit the form, and then I saw that really weird thing happen in Safari. The whole page turned to papyrus. It was bizarre. The blue screen of death colors showed up. You should really look into that. So these are the things that are really helpful for me to have written down somewhere. And you don't have to send me a screenshot walkthrough, step by step, like I just had an example. But again, just written down somewhere that lets me know I do this, this, and this, and then the bug happens. Having those tips are incredibly helpful and just speed up the time at which I can address something. So to recap, tip number 3, provide detailed testing feedback. Be aware of browser testing when you test too. Even if it's just on occasion, testing your work in multiple browsers, you could catch something that I need to fix. Send me screenshots whenever possible, if not just all the time. Make it a habit to always send a screenshot if you see something weird. Write down the steps that it took to reproduce the bug, and let me know what versions of things to look at. Operating system, browser version, mobile, not mobile. These things are insanely helpful, like I mentioned, and speed up the time it takes to fix something. So, kind of to conclude everything, for me, being a front-end developer means many things in one. It means that I design for CodeGuard, and I write the front-end code, and I understand the back-end code, and interact with it, and integrate it into my work. I think front-end developers, we write code, we work in Photoshop, we work in the console and in browsers, and on desktop devices and on mobile devices. My first tip for keeping your front-end developer happy is to get involved with the design process. Care about usability and care about the user's experience. Do this by questioning the design decisions that we make and pushing back against the designs that we create, and wanting to actually truly understand them and give honest feedback. Again, the best backend developers that I've ever worked with all cared as much about design and usability as I did on a project. And again, it just makes working with you that much more enjoyable for me. Walk us through your code when the integration period starts. Hold 3 to 5 minute in-person meetings that give me that high-level understanding. And then after that, the useful comments in your code about what certain methods do, providing useful feedback, maybe in GitHub comments about how to run your code at a later time. Again, do I need to migrate the database? Do I need to do this? Or do I need to do that? Make yourself available for mid-project check-ins. If I do need to ask a second time, because sometimes a second explanation is just needed when it comes to understanding your backend code. And finally, provide feedback to us in a format that is useful for us. You found a bug in Chrome? Awesome. What version of Chrome? Send me a screenshot. I can't stress enough how much your front-end developer will love you if you just send screenshots instead of saying stuff out loud to them. Saw that one thing on that one page in that one browser. Some of these things may seem like common sense, but I think that some of them are so easy to do that they can also be perceived as unimportant to a developer. And I have worked with backend developers in the past who didn't care about some of these things as much, and it did make my work harder because of it. In my experience, the closer the gap between the designer and the backend developer, the better the project went. In my case, I do fill that design and front-end developer role, so the closer I work with the backend developer, the smoother that things went. And this means that they jump in on the brainstorming process with me, and they do wireframes and sketches with me. And this means that I'm invited to their backend implementation planning meetings and their flowchart meetings, when they talk about the more complicated pieces. We all join each other's work at different stages of the project. I want to know that I want to make sure that you are informed about my design decisions, just like I know that you want me to understand your code. We all have our strengths and weaknesses, I think, when it comes to development, and it takes all of us working together to make a project successful. Strong communication between these different roles, I think, is what really makes a project a success in the end and keeps everyone happy. So I hope you've learned some things on how to keep your front-end developer happy and keep communication strong on your team. So that's all I have. Thank you for listening. This is my Twitter username if you want to @ me with questions you have, any feedback, if you think you learned something. So does anyone have any questions? No questions?
How much do you writing CSS, developing that with the backend developer?
How much does... So the question is, how often does the backend developer on my team get involved with the CSS and the styles? The CSS and the HTML aren't necessarily things that they get too crazy involved with, but definitely the design part of it they do. Like when we start thinking about what something should actually look like. I share with them all my sketches, my wireframes, my Photoshop files, and they do jump in on that part of the process. Writing the actual front-end code, not so much. They do jump in with some of the JavaScript from time to time, but not so much the CSS. But that's just my team. If you have a backend developer that's interested in doing that, we do a lot of pair programming at CodeGuard. And naturally, because I am the only front-end developer, I'm always only working with another back-end developer. So I think if you were to pair your front-end developers with your back-end developers at work, you'd get some really interesting combinations, and I think they would come up with some interesting solutions to problems together. So I encourage pair programming between different types of developers if they're just writing CSS or if they were writing Ruby or something else. Any other questions? Mm-hmm.
Is that a common thing that happens in your organization?
Can you, repeat just one more time?
In a simpler vein, does the backend developers also help with the JavaScript or the unit tests of your front-end code, or is that pretty much separate? And does the backend ever come in and help out with that?
Yeah. At my company, they definitely do jump in on that process. When it's time to sit down and we're done building a feature and it's time to test the feature, naturally between a front-end developer and a back-end developer, maybe we're trying to break the feature in different ways, because you want to get together and break everything and see where the holes are in the feature. But we pretty much all, we create a giant testing document of front-end needs and back-end needs of what needs to be tested, and every developer goes through the entire thing at my company. That means the back-end developers are opening up Internet Explorer 6 and looking at the pages, and that means I am going in and testing the more complicated pieces of their code and their functionality. So we do, all of us developers, we do share responsibility in testing between all the different stuff we do. Anyone else? I'm sorry, can you say it one more time?
Sure. For a given project, like sometimes the server team or the front end team might get ahead of each other, so you try to work on pieces of the project and finish and say it's done based on some criteria before you move on.
So the question is,
If the API on the back end
Yeah.
Try to avoid
Yeah, I'm trying to, yeah.
Oh, yeah. We do work in parallel often. There are times when I'm done with all the designs, I'm done with all the front-end code before the back-end code has even started. So yeah, that does happen on our team where there are just pieces being built separately. I mean, obviously the project won't launch until everything is completed and integrated. So if your question was kind of towards testing, we just wait until everything was done. So we do all test together. Does that kind of answer the question? Sort of, not really.
It was just for improving the relationship.
Oh, improving the relationship.
In the front end.
Yeah.
It's like sometimes you can get ahead even prototyping or on the UI side, or you can get ahead with the API and much more than
Right.
So it's just more of that.
I mean, usually we wireframe and sketch out the features first, naturally, and even if it takes a long time before the back-end work even starts, I think just having your back-end developer jump in on that meeting so they just get an idea of what's coming even just helps, Any other questions? All right, well, thank you, everyone.